Welcome back. Today I'm going to be bringing you my cornerback ranking for the 2026 NFL Draft. If you do enjoy the content, please consider liking and subscribing. It would be very much appreciated. Now let's jump into it. At 10, I've got Colton Hood out of Tennessee, and I have a day 3 evaluation on him. Colton Hood is the first of 2 Tennessee cornerbacks we'll be speaking about on this ranking, both of which I find to be greatly overrated. It doesn't make them bad players, but they are not the potential first-round talents that they are being projected as, in my opinion. Tennessee asked their corners to keep the receivers in front of them, and what Hood was for them is a player who maintained strong discipline in his positioning. He's not a terrible athlete, and uses his physicality to disrupt routes when engaging with receivers. He's fine, but someone please tell me what he's going to provide a team with that makes him even worth considering near the first round. He's very average, if not slightly below in terms of physical tools, height, weight, length and speed, and he appears slightly rigid and slow out of his back pedal, so I don't even think he's a particularly strong off-man coverage defender either. So yeah, I'm just not seeing it with Colton Hood. At 9, I've got Chris Johnson out of San Diego State. Chris Johnson made a name for himself this season as no defender in college football had a lower NFL passer rating when targeted. He did this with a gutsiness to read the quarterback's eyes and break on the ball, where he displayed impressive ball skills. This said, he's been playing against weak competition, and I think the jump to the NFL will be a telling one. He looks a stiff athlete, and his 4.4 40-yard dash was up there in a slow cornerback group this year, but he appears to lack explosion on the field. I really like his run defending. He reads it well and wraps up his tackles consistently, but he's not very big, he's not very fast, he's not very fluid, and even as a zone defender, I would suggest he is more opportunistic than genuinely instinctual. Moving into my day 2 evaluations with my number 8 is D'Angelo Pons out of Indiana. At 5'8" with sub 30-inch arms, D'Angelo Pons is obviously not going to survive on the outside despite never playing in the slot in college. But what was far more disappointing to see was that he totally lacks the ability to change direction, because there's plenty of cornerbacks in this video that have a similar stiffness to them. But if anything, it's more important in the slot to be able to shift and turn with ease, because you can't dictate the receiver's movement by closing off your hips and forcing them to the sideline or forcing them inside. You're in the middle. You have to be open in your back pedal and ready to go either way, and Pons doesn't have that ability. Now, I know what my plan would be if I was drafting this player, and there's a reason he's not at the bottom of this ranking. He should be a safety. Indiana very rarely put their defenders in pure man coverage. Their base was quarters, meaning the outside cornerbacks are playing as deep as the safeties in theory, and this is where Pons was able to display the traits he does have. Phenomenal instincts, great awareness in coverage, and reads the run fantastically. He wraps up his tackles, he's got excellent closing speed. I found it hard to find a spot on the ranking for him because there's no inclination that he'll play safety in the NFL, and he's never done it before. But his traits clearly line up with safety, preferably in a more too-high style of defense. And if a team picks up on that and looks to play him that way, I'll be much more excited about his potential. At 7, I've got Jermond McCoy out of Tennessee. Jermond McCoy is a misunderstood prospect, and I don't mean that in a good way. Being a young prospect and having missed the entirety of last season due to a torn ACL, McCoy has built his draft stock off of one very strong statistical season in the SEC. But his film in that season tells a story of hidden flaws. Let's start with the positives. McCoy played a ton of off-man or zone coverage, and he is excellent at maintaining a strong position in his back pedal as he keeps his weight on the front foot, ready to pounce. He is also pretty physical, using his hands to stay glued to receivers, usually within the bounds of legality, although it may cause flags to fly occasionally in the NFL. Having been a former receiver, his ball skills are excellent, and last but not least, he's really good when it comes to route recognition, anticipating when his receiver is going to break and then being on top of him as he does. All these things, however, cover up a prospect who does nothing to impress me physically. He has a skinny frame, pretty short arms, middling speed, and although I'm sure this isn't the consensus opinion, as he did cover it up pretty well in college, I think his hips are a little bit too tight. You may be wondering why any of these things matter. I mean, if he's covering it up with his other skills, doesn't that make it okay? Well, if you watch the Ohio State game at the end of 2024, you'll see glimpses of what could be coming his way in the NFL. Put simply, you can't cover up all those physical limitations consistently against NFL competition. And actually, for some of the cerebrality that he shows in his route recognition, he's consistently leaving a huge cushion in off-man or zone, and he seems slow to read the quarterback's eyes and close that gap. So to be clear, I'm not saying he's going to be a bad player. He's young and could still learn how to play zone effectively and thrive in a league that's moving in that direction. But he's coming off a torn ACL, and I'm not seeing any of the upside that would suggest he should be drafted anywhere near he's being projected. At 6, I've got Brandon Cisse out of South Carolina. Brandon Cisse has had the injury bug, missing games in 2024 due to a significant wrist injury and playing through knocks this season to his upper body and to his knee. He isn't the biggest and has sub 31-inch arms, but I think he could survive on the outside as a low-end starter in the right system. The first thing I thought when I watched Cisse is I bet this guy jumped well in the combine. He's twitchy with decent long speed, but most of all I would describe his athleticism as springy. He just has this bouncy presence about him. He played a ton of man coverage in college, which I love to see because I think the valuable corners, generally speaking, are the ones who can be left on an island with a good receiver and stick to his hip throughout the rep. But actually, I don't think Cisse is going to survive in man coverage at the next level. He's too stiff, and the lack of agility is also why I don't see him in the slot. He needs everything in front of him, and in a zone-heavy scheme, I think his traits are much better suited. Despite a lack of zone experience, I thought his instincts were really impressive, and his twitchy, bouncy nature that I mentioned will make quarterbacks nervous throwing his way in zone, as it's very hard to know where his momentum is leaning. On top of this, he's one of the best run-defending corners in the class. So don't get me wrong, this isn't my cup of tea. I like sticky, fluid cornerbacks, but assuming he's drafted into a scheme that suits him, I don't think Cisse will look out of place. At 5, I've got Keith Abney II out of Arizona State. Keith Abney played on the outside in college, but should be a nickel in the NFL due to his smaller stature, sub 30-inch arms, and lack of long speed. Although Arizona State tended to be conservative in coverage, once Abney had allowed the receiver onto him, he displayed plenty of fluidity and body control and stuck to the receivers consistently. As well as this, he shows good instincts in zone and impressive ball skills, although his length limits his ability to make plays on the ball versus bigger receivers. He often lacks route anticipation, but the fluidity makes up for this, and he does have a touch of burst to close the space when required. This is not a twitchy athlete, and his upside is likely limited to a reliable slot corner. This said, Abney looks ready to slide in and be that reliable slot corner from day one. Moving into my second round evaluations, at number 4 is Davison Igbinosun out of Ohio State. Davison Igbinosun was a refreshing outlier in this group as he easily meets the size parameters you're looking for in an outside corner. 6'2", 195 pounds, and importantly, his arms measured in just a tick below 33 inches, putting him in the 90th percentile. The trick for his NFL projection will be to find a team that plays as much press man coverage as possible, an approach which is largely left in the past by NFL defenses in a movement more and more towards zone and off-man coverages, possibly in an attempt to avoid physical contact between the DBs and the receivers, as the league becomes softs and calls flags for minimal contact. Igbinosun's long speed isn't great, but he uses his length and physicality to make it very difficult for the receiver to find breathing space. And for a man of his size, his hips were surprisingly oily. I would even go as far to say that he is fluid in terms of staying on top of the subtle shakes and shifts a receiver makes in their route. The problem is that whilst the different aspects of fluidity and flexibility usually go hand in hand, Igbinosun's lateral agility does not match his vertical agility. Not only does he struggle to break out of his back pedal, but he lacks the burst to make up the space. This is why he needs to be in a press man scheme. Not that it's a total fix and no team plays exclusively press man, of course, but if he could find a team that allows him to either stay close to the receiver or in zone, just ask him to drop deep and stay disciplined. Don't put him in situations where he's having to break sharply and close the space. I think he could survive as a starter. At number 3, I've got Keontae Scott out of Miami. Teams will feel nervous drafting Keontae Scott as he's an older prospect and has some injury stuff to think about as well. In 2023, he was playing for Auburn and had a high ankle sprain before he then transferred to Miami for his final collegiate season, where he was having an excellent year before unfortunately suffering a serious foot injury towards the end of the season. I was really impressed by his skill set. He's definitely a nickel. In fact, unlike a lot of these prospects who get away with being on the outside despite a lack of size in college, Scott played nickel in college and he's got the traits to be one of the best in the NFL. He played plenty of zone for Miami, where he lacks some discipline and awareness in his placement. He's very easily manipulated by the quarterback's eyes, but no prospect in this video had less receptions per man coverage snap. Not only is he explosive and twitchy, but he possesses excellent body control and plenty of fluidity. He's also got 31.5-inch arms, which actually for a nickel is probably above average. He doesn't read the run very well, but in summary, I just like the traits. I think he's a real hidden gem, and hopefully the medical isn't too concerning. Sneaking into my first round evaluations is number 2, Avion Terrell out of Clemson. 6 years after first round pick AJ Terrell entered the league out of the same college and at the same position, here comes his brother Avion. At 5'11", 186 pounds, with 31-inch arms and questionable long speed, Avion Terrell could survive on the outside when required, but projects best as a nickel. He played a ton of man coverage in college and thrives due to his natural body control and fluidity. He also does a good job staying square in the slot and rarely gets caught with his hips in the wrong direction, although I feel he could be more proactive closing the space as he gives up a lot of receptions underneath. Terrell is instinctually strong, often the first to pick up on screens or read the quarterback's eyes and make a play, but he is very impulsive. When he sees where he thinks the play is developing, he goes all in on that being the outcome. Too often, this leaves him vulnerable to quarterbacks who possess the ability to manipulate defenders with their eyes, which is of course far more common in the NFL. But the instincts are there with a bit of refinement, so I would suggest that he is scheme flexible and could slide straight in at nickel and hold his own for an NFL defense. But by a country mile, my number 1 in this class is Mansour Delane out of LSU. At 6 feet tall and under 190 pounds in mass with 30-inch arms, Mansour Delane lacks the size teams are looking for in a lockdown outside corner. However, in a less physical league than even 5 years ago, size is more of an asset for a cornerback than a requirement. Delane transferred to LSU for his final year in college and has consistently displayed elite-level route mirroring versus SEC competition. In terms of speed, it's nothing special, but he's definitely got enough, and having played plenty of press man coverage for LSU, his ability to switch gears, change direction, or pounce out of his back pedal is on full display when you watch his film. Given his ability, I was a little surprised to see him giving his receiver so much cushion at times, and on the rare occasions he gave up a reception, this tended to be the reason. Having said this, he's an instinctually solid player and was pretty flawless in zone, although I would love to see him drafted by a man-heavy team that shows off his sticky coverage. Delane obviously isn't going to offer the warm, cozy feeling teams get when they draft a cornerback in the top 10 with great size like a Pat Surtain, JC Horn or Sauce Gardner, but the traits he does possess I think will make up for that and give a team the lockdown corner they are looking for. So I'll be honest, super disappointing cornerback group. There is one guy who I feel really comfortable drafting in the first round, and that's Mansour Delane. But this class generally lacks speed, it lacked size, and it lacked what I actually look for most in a corner, which is fluidity. Thankfully, I'll be bringing you safeties next, and if there is any truth to the consensus, it's entirely possible that I have more first-round safety evaluations than cornerbacks this year. If you did enjoy the content, please consider liking and subscribing, as it would be very much appreciated. And I'll see you next time.